Hi, I'm Mark and I like to talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view, although I do know the UK from the inside as well, so don't worry. With Keir Starmer, London is now governed by, some people would say, passionate Brexit opponent. But is he moving the island closer to the EU? Many Britons have been waiting for such clear words on Brexit for years, and not just in the Labour Party. Now Keir Starmer is finally saying what some expect. He's an internationalist. That's what he told his assembled party members. And that means, I believe that the greatest challenges facing our nation, armed conflict, terrorism, climate change and uncontrolled globalization, are best tackled together with our European partners in the EU. That was almost 6 years ago. At the time, Keir Starmer was shadow Brexit minister in the opposition. At the Labour Party conference in Liverpool in September 2018, his speech was met with enthusiastic applause, especially because he had added this demand. He wanted a second referendum on the government's Brexit deal, and that this vote should also include the option of remain on the ballot paper. That means remaining in the European Union after all. There was never such a second referendum. What they now have is a passionate Brexit opponent in Downing Street, they say. But will the new British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reverse his country's decision to leave the EU? 8 years after the vote to leave, the mood on the island has clearly turned against Brexit. Around 60% of Britons now believe that saying goodbye to the single market of 400 million inhabitants was a mistake. This U-turn is partly due to the fact that many of the 52% of voters who voted for Brexit on the day no longer have any opinion at all because they're now dead. The 2016 vote was also one of the old against the young. And that is something that the people, especially some young people, did not realize at that time. In fact, Starmer and his Foreign Minister David Lammy announced big steps immediately after taking office. There was talk of a reset and of a security pact that they wanted to conclude with the EU. At a meeting with Olaf Scholz during the NATO summit in Washington, Starmer said he was striving for the widest possible cooperation with Germany. And at the summit of the European Political Community, that's an invention of French President Emmanuel Macron, which was taking place last week near Oxford, the new Prime Minister could celebrate internationalism with up to 47 heads of state and government from the EU and its neighborhood. And he did that with a finish English silverware, as we know. But what concrete results can come from such glittering starts? It quickly becomes clear Starmer has no plans to return to the EU. He would rather lay a few paths towards Brussels. And this is partly due to the domestic political limits of rapprochement. And on the other hand, to the EU's aversion for free riders who try to profit from the club without accepting its basic rules, such as freedom of movement. Immediately before the general election, Starmer said there would be no return to the EU in his lifetime. And this far-reaching commitment at the youthful age of 61 for a head of government is also due to the fact that Starmer owes his overwhelming election victory to many disappointed Tory supporters. The Brexit regret of many Britons also does not mean that they want to reopen the emotional divide that the EU debate has drawn through the country. And if Great Britain were to join the EU again, it would only be under less attractive conditions than before. As a new member, the kingdom would, for example, have to introduce the euro. And a British rebate on EU contributions as it existed would also no longer be possible. Because of all this, Labour drew 3 red lines towards the EU during the election campaign. No return to the single market or the customs union, and no restoration of freedom of movement for people. The last point in particular was important in view of the unfulfilled promise to Brexit supporters to reduce immigration. In the past 3 years alone, almost 2 million people came to the island. However, the thing that Labour least wants to talk about is what the EU most urgently wants from Starmer: easier access to the island for EU citizens. Miguel Berger, the German ambassador in London, said at a panel discussion 2 weeks ago that he very much hopes that some of the hurdles that have been put in place by Brexit can be overcome. From a German perspective, this primarily includes making it possible for young people to work or study in Great Britain for 2 years without having to go through a complex visa process. The answer from pro-European Labour MP Stella Creasy was that this was of course desirable because we need workers and students. There's just one problem. Students are also statistically recorded as immigrants in Great Britain, and Labour has promised to bring the numbers down. Starmer and his foreign policy colleagues are therefore focusing on another area of possible rapprochement, and that's defense policy. There is a shortage of ammunition and equipment on the island and on the continent, partly because much of it was delivered to Ukraine. The former head of the British Army recently admitted in the Times that if the public knew how empty the nation's ammunition depots were, the hairs on the back of their necks would stand on end. Great Britain is therefore very interested in becoming part of the new EU procurement strategy that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented in March. The aim is to make the European arms industry more efficient through targeted support, coordination and joint orders. The EU's innovation program in the defense sector also aims to involve non-member Ukraine. Kiev should be given the opportunity to participate in orders on preferential terms. Britain is home to one of the largest arms companies in the world, that's British Aerospace Electronic Systems, and unequal competitive conditions with the continent would be fatal. The EU, on the other hand, has a strategic interest in partnering with Britain again. An additional nuclear power, another permanent UN Security Council member, and a dose of realism would be useful to strengthen the European part of NATO. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Britain pushed for support for the attacked country from the outset and took the lead in key weapon systems, such as, for example, the Storm Shadow cruise missiles. In addition, the days when Europe could rely on the USA militarily are likely to be over once and for all in case of a re-election of Donald Trump. The new British Foreign Minister David Lammy is therefore proposing a security pact for Europe. It is intended not only to put military cooperation between London and the continent on a firm footing, but also cooperation on economic, climate, health, cyber and energy security issues. So broadly defined, the Security Pact sounds like a door opener back to the EU. But what the Starmer government is probably primarily concerned with is pragmatism. Why not save money and time by building artillery shells and frigates together? Why not give the European arms industry planning security through a sustained flow of demand? In Berlin, people are open to this rapprochement. If a bilateral joint strategic initiative between the EU and the UK could be agreed, this is how the Foreign Office sees it, it would not bring Great Britain back into the EU, but it would be able to tie it closely to it. In Brussels, the former Prime Minister of Lower Saxony, David McAllister from the CDU, who now chairs the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, is promoting the British wishes. Ultimately, it's about building a single market for defense goods, says McAllister, and I would urge the EU to open it up to third countries, not just Great Britain, but also Norway and Canada. However, from the point of view of European dogmatists, being in the EU for a little while it's just unacceptable as being pregnant for a little while. Either you benefit from the EU as it is, with membership fees and open borders, or you stay out of it. In Paris in particular, we hear people are being reserved about the British advances. The Germans therefore need to talk a little more to our partners, especially in French, advises McAllister. The question at the moment is just who to talk to in Paris. There is no government there at the moment, and if there is one, it's likely to remain shaky. And much of the new friendliness that Keir Starmer is showing towards the Europeans is therefore likely to serve to make a new British attitude clear. From London's perspective, the EU is no longer the bureaucratic apparatus that threatens freedom, but a group of good old friends with whom they would like to have more to do again. This would not be a step back, they say, but it's also a little more than a purely atmospheric re-entry. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.